here's a video to show another way of thinking about using your 3D printer in your everyday job, work, craft, whatever you're thinking of doing or making. So here we have something I've designed in CAD and 3D printed. It's a mould, a 3-part mould, to create some little rubber pieces I'm actually making at the moment for a job involving very soft rubber. So here is the rubber. It's just silicone, very soft silicone. It's got a shore hardness of 10, and it goes off in about an hour, so you can demold it in an hour. You have 15-minute work time. So let's get on and I'll show you. I'm using my phone as a timer, so I'll set this for 15 minutes. Here's the mold. Now we put the mold together, and I have some line-up marks on the bottom. Then I use some masking tape to keep that in place. And then I use some masking tape to go around the top rim. This gives me a little bit more room in the top pot for tipping the rubber without it going over the edges. We start off by measuring out one part. It's a 2-part mix for the rubber. So here I'm going to measure out the rubber. So about 7 grams. Just, it's not a lot, but I'll just show you. To get rid of that 0.4 is that much rubber. But on something as small as this, when you're using small quantities, it's best to get it as close as you can. Then I'm going to put on as you can see with this, it's so sensitive, you can just bang the desk, and it will give you point difference. So now slowly with this one, because we can't remove any. So slow down the pour. We're looking for 14 grams. So very slowly. Start easing off. About 8, we'll lift it because the rest of the pour will probably take it up. Just remove the extra bit, and that's close enough. We're now going to mix this. And don't worry about putting bubbles into the mix, because I'm going to put all of this into the vacuum chamber, which will degas the liquid or the mixture, and mix it for about a minute to get to all of the corners and everything else and give it a good mix. Then I'm going to slightly degas it. This takes out the air bubbles out of the mix. Well, most of them anyway. So we'll seal that and turn that on. The top is a piece of acrylic with a rubber seal, and I've used an old saucepan. This takes the air out quite quickly. I've got a small vacuum pump. These are quite cheap and readily available on YouTube, on eBay. This takes about half a minute or so, first of all, just to get the first lot of bubbles out. You'll see it rise inside the pot. I don't think you'll see it through the camera. And then it will just drop when the bubbles burst. And there it goes. This just takes the initial amount of bubbles out. Now the rubber is degassed for the first time. You can tip this into the mould. So I scrape the rubber down into a pile, get as much off of the sides as I can, initially just to start with. Then pour it into the mould on one side. I have the mould at an angle so it can start running down the sides of the mould. Easier because there's still air on one side. No air gets trapped as it goes down through. Scrape more out. Put this to one side. Now you can tip the mould upright and it will start pouring down the other side. But to make sure you release all the bubbles, I put the mould back into the pot and I degas it once more. This should remove any bubble which is within the mould, release them to the surface, and you can't really see, but it's bubbling up now inside as the bubbles get released from the mould and rise to the surface. As you can see, the mould inside the chamber, there's bubbles rising to the surface. This will do this for about 5 to 6 minutes while the vacuum pump is drawing the bubbles to the surface. Hopefully this removes all of the bubbles from the finished product. The vacuum pump has now been running for about 5 to 6 minutes. I can now switch it off and I'll close off the vent, the in-vent, and leave this now under vacuum for about another minute or so. This has now been under vacuum for about 6 to 7 minutes. I can now release the air. Or release the vacuum actually. I've taken the air out. Let the air back in so I can release the lid. Now the pressure's equal. And take it out. Now I've chased out all of the bubbles. The surface of the rubber is nice and smooth. I can now put the cap, the finishing piece of the mould, on the top and leave it for an hour before demoulding. With the mould lid, carefully place it over the middle shaft, if you like, and I just gently rotate it down into position in between the studs which line up the whole piece. I then just push it firmly, rotating it very, very slightly as it goes in place. And that's it. We now leave that for an hour to dry. Here's one which I've already finished and it's dried. So to remove this, I use the handle of my mixing stick, and I have 2 holes running through the center here, so I can put it in and pull that up from the rubber. Once the lid's removed, you have to remove the center core. Now this is very stiff. You can't push this out with your finger because the surface of the rubber is stuck to it at the moment. So I use a press to do this. In fact, it's I put it in my lathe and I just wind the lathe in, pushing against this, which will push it out. Once it's in the lathe, I can just turn this handle, which usually drills a hole, and it pushes the rubber, pushes the spindle or the core of the mold out, and I can release this, take it out, and it's sticking out of the end, as you can see. Once the mold's been released, or the core has been released, you can now pull this out and start releasing the rubber from the inside of the mold. I usually put my finger in the end and just push one side down so it releases the bottom of the rubber. Then I peel away at the top, get a good grip, and I just wobble it out. And there you have it. You have some excess rubber from the side of the mold, which just pulls off. I can clean that up afterwards. And around the top, as you can see, it's so thin it just pulls away. This takes a little bit of time to do, which I will clean up before I use the components. But this gives me a soft component which I can use within the device that I'm making. Here is the finished piece out of the mold. There's different parts which are textured. I have like a crown at the top of this rubber. It's very flexible, and I don't know if I can get the right angle. I think so. There's a texture. If I put my finger behind, there's a texture on the inner wall which I wanted, and it's picked that up perfectly. Then the rest of the shaft is quite smooth, and the outside is quite smooth, and the bottom is this gets clamped with this little ridge and makes a waterproof seal. I hope this has been helpful and sort of makes you think about other uses you can use a 3D printer for, rather than actually having the finished product. This enables me to make a different finished product. Thanks for watching.